The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will give his keynote address to the Conservative Party conference this afternoon, with business leaders looking for help during tough times. Dame Sharon White is to step down at the end of her tumultuous 5-year term as chair of the John Lewis Partnership. And water companies set out a 5-year plan to tackle sewage spills, but it'll mean a large rise in bills for customers. Good morning, this is Business Live with me, Ian King. Now, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will this afternoon give his keynote speech to the Conservative Party conference, promising tougher rules on benefits and a boost to the living wage, expected to be at least £11 an hour. But what about business? Will Mr Hunt be able to offer more help to boost growth? And what exactly does the business community want? Well, joining me now from Manchester is Ray NewtonSmith, Director General of the CBI. Ray, good to see you this morning. Clearly, Mr Hunt is playing down talk of tax cuts. Is that the right approach, given the state of the public finances?
Look, we know the Chancellor faces a difficult job of trying to balance the public finances in tough economic times. But I think what's really important for business is that we set out a competitive landscape and think as well about how we can encourage business investment. That's what drives growth and productivity around the UK. And look, the Chancellor has set out a 3-year capital allowance. We'd like to see that made permanent to really help incentivise investment around the UK. We also need to look at business rates. If you think about our hotels, our restaurants, our manufacturers, they're set to see their business rates bill go up in line with inflation, which, as we know, is really high. So it's probably a moment to think about whether we can freeze that at its current level, again, so we can see some of the investment in our high streets and local communities that I think all of us would like to see.
We're told that Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, is going to be calling for a cut in corporation tax to take it back down to 19%. Is that something you'd welcome?
Look, I think we need to look at the tax system, in the round. And I think for the moment, the real priority is thinking how we incentivise business investment, how we think about business rates. And look, at some point, we can probably look at the overall headline rates of corporation tax, but it's only one lever. And as we know, there are pressure on our public services, and we need to make sure that we have a position which ensures that they are well funded, that we're not leading to ever-increasing deficit. And I think, thinking back to where we were a year ago, I think it's really important that the Chancellor sets out a sustainable path for our public finances.
Now, you've just published your submission for the autumn statement. You've called for a doubling down on green markets. What do you think of the fact that Rishi Sunak appears to be going a bit cold on this?
Look, the messages I'm hearing from business is that they want the Prime Minister, they want the Chancellor to be out there talking about the opportunities there are around green growth. There is such a consensus, I think, in the business community about the need to make the transition to net zero. It is a transition, and I think some of the challenges is when we see some of the goalposts shifting, as we saw with electric vehicles and the phase-out date, it can just send a mixed signal to consumers and to businesses, and what they want to see is a clear direction. And look, I think we saw some good announcements in what the Prime Minister set out previously, talking about grid connections, which is something business leaders talk to me all the time around how we can make sure we get the connections in our grid to allow us to decarbonise our energy system and across the whole economy. So if we can prioritise those according to strategic projects rather than first come, first serve, I think that's a really important indication. But what we need is the UK to be really clear that internationally we will continue to lead the world in reducing carbon emissions, that we want to be a leader on the international stage, and that we are firm in our commitments to meeting our net zero targets, and we set out clear policy frameworks on how we will deliver that. That's what businesses want to work in partnership with government on.
Obviously, it was at the CBI conference where Boris Johnson made a particularly notorious speech. How do you characterise relations between Rishi Sunak's government and business compared with Boris Johnson and Liz Truss?
Look, I think we've seen the Prime Minister work hard to build the relationship with business. And I know and here and particularly at party conference, there are so many business leaders here keen to talk to politicians. And I think what we need to see is is setting out a really clear vision for the UK on a global sphere. I think we need to make sure that we have the policies in place and are really capturing the opportunities around green growth, and that we see politicians from both sides of the House really listening to businesses, the issues they're facing around skills, and that we set out a really positive vision for the UK economy.
We're told that Jeremy Hunt is going to raise the national living wage to £11 an hour. That's being hinted at ahead of his speech this afternoon. Is that something that business can cope with? I mean, it's obviously the money's got to come from somewhere.
Absolutely, and I think, look, we have to recognise that the national living wage has been one of the real successes in the UK. We've been able to raise the living wage to being close to that target of 60% of median earnings. And that's been so important for people in work at low pay, being able to have a higher increase in their pay packets. But what's important is that those stretch far, and it doesn't work if those are undermined by higher inflation. So the long-term solution is to make sure we have the right investment in our growth and productivity. It's from that really helps to ensure that any rises in pay is matched and is sustainable over the long term and isn't eroded by higher inflation. So that's all about the things we want to see the Chancellor focus on around business investment, around skills, around innovation. That's what we need to secure higher standards of living over the long term. And I know that that is what is at the forefront of the Chancellor's mind. And good to see some, that also will see mindful of the challenges that those on low pay are facing in a cost of living crisis as well.
And Rain, while we have you, you've obviously just lined up a financing package for the CBI itself. Are you happy now with the financing arrangements at the CBI? Is it on a sustainable footing?
Yes, we're absolutely confident that we've got the right platform for growth to really be out there talking to businesses. And it's been so great the past few weeks talking to businesses and universities and further education colleges around the country about what's on their minds, and then be able to sit down with policymakers and say, these are what businesses need to really ensure that the UK is a competitive place to do business, that we're making it easier for businesses of all sizes to be able to create jobs and provide the sustainable living standards that we all want to achieve in our society.
Rain, good to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed for joining me.
All right. Thanks, Ian.
Some other business news stories for you now. And Dame Sharon White is to step down as chair of the John Lewis Partnership when her 5-year term comes to an end in February 2025. The partnership, which as well as the UK's biggest department store business owns the Waitrose supermarket chain, said this morning that Dame Sharon had asked the partnership board to initiate the process to appoint a successor. The partnership recently warned that its turnaround will take 2 years longer than expected to achieve. We'll be getting reaction to that fairly shortly. Activity in the UK's manufacturing sector continued to contract last month, according to survey data published this morning. The Purchasing Managers Index survey, in which anything above 50 represents growth and anything below that a contraction, posted a reading of 44.3 for September for manufacturing. That was a slight improvement on the 39-month low of 43 recorded in August. S&P Global, which compiles the report, said output, new orders and employment in the sector all fell during the month. House prices last month were down 5.3% on September last year, according to Nationwide Building Society. That equalled the year-on-year decline seen in August, which was the biggest annual fall since July 2009. The UK's second largest mortgage lender said house prices were unchanged month on month. Well, Nationwide said that for the 3 months to the end of September, house prices were down 4.7% on the same quarter last year. It said all regions of the UK saw a fall in house prices during the quarter, with the biggest decline seen in the West Country. And the UK government this morning shortlisted 6 companies to develop small modular reactors, the nuclear plants it hopes can be rolled out at pace as part of hitting the UK's climate targets. Rolls-Royce, EDF Energy and a joint venture between General Electric and Hitachi are among those shortlisted. The government will launch the next phase of the competition shortly, with a view to announcing in spring next year which of the companies has won the contract. Well, equity markets in the Asia-Pacific region made a downbeat start to the fourth quarter overnight. That's a picture. You can ignore the figure for Shanghai. China, of course, closed all week for the Golden Week holiday. Well, in Europe, stocks have been trading to the upside first thing this morning, although they've moved into the red as the session has gone on. Talking points this morning include Fresenius, the German healthcare group, is off 3.5% in Frankfurt. That's on reports that its recent acceptance of state aid to help it with energy costs may impact its ability to pay dividends. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 also trading to the downside this morning. FTSE 100 off 0.2% right now, with the drug majors weighing on the index. There are some gainers to mention, though, and the water companies Severn Trent and United Utilities are higher as the water industry published its business plan for 2025 to 2030. Another leading blue chip gainer this morning is BAE Systems, up just under 1% right now after it was awarded a £4 billion submarine contract under the AUKUS programme. Outside the FTSE, the Southwest Waters owner Pennon Group, again up 3%. That's among leading gainers, as is First Group. That's received a push from one of the brokers this morning. On the foreign exchange markets, well, the story remains one of dollar strength. The dollar trading right now at a 10-month high against a basket of currencies. Sterling is off by 1/3 right now against the greenback, more or less unchanged against the euro. The single currency likewise off 1/3 against the dollar. The oil price sold off on Friday evening, but it steadied this morning. A barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back $92.96 a barrel. That's up a little under 0.9%. Well, joining me now is Russ Mould. He's Investment Director at AJ Bell. Russ, good to see you this morning. It's not a quoted company, of course, but I guess we should kick off with John Lewis Partnership. Are you surprised to see Dame Sharon signalling her exit?
I guess it's a carefully planned succession. That's one thing that you can say. It's been a very difficult time for the retailer, but that doesn't make them unique. Equally, there are retailers who have thrived, even in the last 5 years. If it's right product, right price, right format, you will do well, as Lord Simon Wolfson will probably tell you very clearly over at Next. So I think it has been a tough time for the firm. Maybe now the more interesting thing for outsiders like myself will be what route they take with her successor. Will it be an internal hire, suggesting they're very happy with the strategy and the path to recovery and the return to profitability plan? Or is it actually we go externally and maybe this time we get some retail experience? Because that's been one thing that, for all of Dame Sharon's undoubted skill set on her CV, that's one thing she didn't have when she started. Yeah,
I mean, could you say that she had a bad inheritance? I mean, obviously, for the early part of the duration, I mean, as soon as she arrived, the country went into lockdown. She's had to close stores. I mean, she's had a lot of luck, all of it bad, you could say.
I think you probably could say, but equally Lord Wolfson would combat that by saying, well, he's been through the same things in many ways, and Next has continued to thrive, even if its profits haven't grown that rapidly during the period. Yeah, there are lots of things that were inherited, never knowingly undersold, and big department store formats, which have been big challenges for the firm. But I think overall, the fact that losses have been really quite tricky in the last couple of years, it probably hasn't been a great success so far.
What about Waitrose? I mean, that seems to be doing OK from the latest numbers.
I mean, it's probably attracting a demographic sweet spot in that respect, relatively well-heeled, affluent customers, although there are price increases, they can probably wear them better than average, I would suggest. Again, the sale and leaseback plan is something that you look at. When private equity companies do that, when they own a business, it's not always seen as a good thing, and it does saddle or straitjacket the firm into some lease payments further down the road. So you'd better make sure that the profits keep going, because those leases will have to be paid no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, they're saddled with £1.6 billion worth of net debt, and they can't raise capital in the way that a PLC
will. This is one of the great difficulties. And I can see why they're doing the sale and leaseback plan to give them immediate cash now, but it is still adding to those liabilities down the road. So it's a very difficult situation.
Well, looking at the markets, I mentioned in the report, BAE Systems really does have the wind in its sails, this business right now.
Best performing in the FTSE 100 last year, top 20 this year. Some of that's probably down to Russia, Ukraine and fears over global security. Some of it, if you look back to the 1970s when inflation was a big challenge, defence stocks did particularly well then. Unfortunately, generally guaranteed demand, fair degree of pricing power. And I suppose from a government perspective, it's probably quite good from them to be able to say, here's a big contract to a firm that's based in Barrow-in-Furness in the north of England, when they're having a Tory party conference in Manchester right now.
Yes, I think Barrow depends on them.
5,000 or 6,000 employees, and more promised in today's statement, which you've got to say is a good thing.
Yeah. Now, what do you make of the reaction in the water companies today?
Share price is up, which generally tells you we were expecting bad news. We're not too surprised by what we've seen. It is a big increase in capital investment across all of the companies, 51 to 96 billion pounds. Severn Trent's got its retaliation in early. We're going to have a £1 billion capital raising. United Utilities flagged that there may be some equity component to its funding going forward. Pennon, a discreet silence on that, so we'll wait and see.
Yeah, they never say much at the best of times, Pennon Group.
No, even when they did the big asset disposal and did a big special dividend, they kept their counsel fairly tightly, yes.
I mean, of course, these business plans do have to be signed off by Ofwat. Do you see Ofwat telling them to sort of trim?
If you look at what we've seen in the past, some plans go through on the nod, some are sent back for, do some more homework, please. And given that the regulator itself is probably under just as much pressure as the companies, given that a lot of the things the public are unhappy about have happened on Ofwat's watch, I think it probably will bear its teeth and send a few plans back for renewal, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is, of course, Ofwat's priority has been keeping bills down. I mean, that's partly why we're in this situation with sewage.
Well, unfortunately, now bills are going to go. Equally, I'm sure the public and the regulator will say, well, these companies, those three companies you've just mentioned, have paid out £8 billion in dividends over the last 10 years. So it's intriguing that Severn Trent's saying, well, can we have another £1 billion back, please? So sometimes shareholders' willingness to hand over rights issues to give back money that they've gratefully gobbled up always seems a bit strange to me.
Yeah, now, before I let you go, Russ, another one that's caught your eye today, James Halstead.
Any company that can raise its dividend for 46 consecutive years has got to be doing something right. It's a flooring maker, factories in Bury and Teesside. Family ownership is a key thing here. They're not going to do anything daft. They're not going to bet the farm. They know the business inside out. And the increase was only 3% this year, so relatively small by their standards. Still an impressive thing to be able to do. So I think when they started this streak, the share price was less than a penny. So if you're getting 8p a share on that, if you've been patient enough, you'd be doing all right, I reckon.
Yeah, great company. Good to see you, Russ. Thank you.
you.
Still to come here on Business Live, water companies set out a 5-year plan to tackle sewage spill, but it'll mean a rise in bills for customers. Next, I'll be speaking to David Henderson, the head of Water UK. Don't go away.
It started off as a project to do a piece of work which would be a composite of, say, 80 portraits and have it as one piece. So from a distance, it would look quite abstract. And then as you got closer, you'll see the sort of personalities of each portrait. And that's a portrait I just did of a friend's dog who passed away last year. So I trained at the Royal Academy and learned. We did a lot of drawing from life, and there was a lot of portraiture as well. So I was inspired by that. My father was an artist, and he did some wonderful portraits. So I suppose it's in my psyche, really. Unfortunately, 10 years ago, my fiancée passed away, Debbie, and she said, if you can do 80, you can do 100. If you can do 100, you can do 200. And she said, you could actually do the city of St. David's. And I just thought, what an amazing idea. And it's sort of her legacy as well. And it's very much, the way I've dealt with bereavement and focusing on people. And I've met some amazing people through it and some wonderful characters. And you get to know a certain sort of facet of their characters, an insight into who they are. And it's done me the power of good. And I just absolutely adore doing them. My philosophy is just to carry on doing it. I love doing them so much, and it sort of centers me, and it's something, as I said earlier on, a focal point for me. And it sort of, so by next year, I hope to achieve 1,000. Well, I don't hope, I will achieve 1,000. So that seems a considerable number to exhibit.
It's like Emirates. It's like better. Fly Emirates. Fly better.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Now, the water industry today sought permission from the industry regulator Ofwat to invest a record £96 billion into cleaning up rivers and tackling sewage spills. The investment would be made during the next 5-year regulatory period, which begins in April 2025 and is getting on for nearly double the £51 billion being invested during the current regulatory period. Well, some of that money is going to come from shareholders of the water companies, but under the proposals, the typical household bill in England would rise by £84 per year. The regulator Ofwat will now assess the proposals. Well, joining me now from the Conservative Party conference in Manchester is David Henderson. He's Chief Executive of Water UK. David, welcome to you. Is this an acknowledgement that the industry has not invested enough in the recent past?
Well, the industry has invested $200 billion, to be precise, since 1990 when we had privatisation in England and in Wales. And that investment has delivered transformation of our beaches. We now have 7 times as many classed as excellent. It's given us much less leakage, and it's given us the greatest and cleanest drinking water in the world. But we now need to invest further to tackle the problems of today, such as climate change and a growing population. And that's why we've put forward plans to almost double the amount of investment that we currently provide, to build 10 new reservoirs, to cut leakage even further, and to reduce the amount of sewage that's going into our rivers and seas.
Now, a lot of people will say, hang on, the industry has paid out very generous dividends. I mean, we just heard from Russ Mould there, Pennon United and Severn Trent, some $8 billion over the last few years alone. Why shouldn't shareholders pick up the tab for this? Why do bills have to go up?
Well, in England, shareholders put the money up front, and these investors can invest elsewhere. If we want them to invest in the UK's water industry, they need to obtain a return. Last year, that return was on average 4%. Quite modest, in fact less than you'd receive if you had a deposit in a fixed term rate at a bank. And this return, in fact 3 companies made a loss, and that return enables the investment to be brought forward, which gives us the investment that we so desperately need. If we had the taxpayers putting this money up themselves, the government would have to borrow, of course, and it would need to pay a return to the people who lend it the money. So in either way we have this industry, whether it's state-owned or privately owned, we need to invest, and you have to ask yourself the question, if it were not in the hands of the private owners in England, would the money that's required, $100 billion in our estimation, be more likely to be spent on schools, hospitals, defence, or even tax cuts than water? Under the model here in England, we will have the investment put up front by the industry, and it will deliver the transformation to ensure we have secure supplies of water in the future and less sewage flowing into our rivers and seas.
Now, under these proposals, 10 new reservoirs would be built. We actually haven't had any reservoirs built in this country for more than 30 years. Why is that?
That is because, unfortunately, we've had the Environment Agency block repeated attempts to build new reservoirs. Look, I understand in the past there wasn't a sense that we needed to have increased supply as much as there is today. We are where we are, and now we need to get on with it. We've had the population grow 20% since 1990, and not one reservoir has opened in that time. Even more so with climate change, we just desperately need to build greater supply of our water, which is why we have now plans to build 10 new reservoirs. We're going to employ 30,000 people to help build them. That's an increase in our workforce of 50% right across the country. That's a great thing about this investment. It's going to be spread all over England and Wales. And as soon as we can get on with it, when we're given the green light by Ofwat, we will.
You've singled out the Environment Agency there, but I mean, we have a pretty ferocious planning regime as well. I mean, Thames Water have been trying to build a new reservoir in Oxfordshire for more than a decade. What gives you optimism that we're going to get round the planning rails?
Well, I think there is now recognition that reservoirs are national assets because they provide national benefit to our country. We cannot anymore afford to have planning interrupt vital infrastructure for this country. It's simply too important. So, of course, proper consultation will occur in the appropriate way, but we cannot have vital infrastructure for our country blocked in the way it has been in the past.
What happens next, David? Presumably Ofwat is going to have to sign off on these proposals. I mean, do you expect Ofwat to sort of rein in the investment plans? I mean, that's traditionally what they normally do.
Well, Ofwat in previous times has been very focused on keeping bills low. We've had a real terms fall in bills since 2010. They're down almost a fifth. And I understand why. Of course, this is a difficult time for many people. Bill increases are never welcome. We are going to treble the number of families that we support in paying those bills, but it's important that we get this infrastructure. Ofwat will go through every proposal of every company line by line. It takes them about a year to do that. And of course, they'll have discussions with the industry around efficiency, how much maintenance is required and so on. But the overarching desire In fact, we would say urgent need for this infrastructure is clear. As you've said, we haven't built a reservoir in 3 decades. It's desperately urgent that we do start that building work now. And so we're hopeful that Ofwat, when it looks at these proposals, will give us the green light to get on with it.
What kind of assumptions are you making about the interest rate backdrop in all of this? Because in the past, the water companies have benefited from being able to invest at cheaper prices in terms of the money markets than Ofwat was reckoning on.
Well, companies make these forecasts. They have detailed assumptions. I think anyone who can predict interest rates at the moment is pretty brave. Companies make their best efforts, and of course that's tested rigorously by Ofwat. They've got teams of economists. They go through these plans line by line, as I say. Sometimes the markets are more favourable for companies, sometimes they're more detrimental. As I said earlier, 3 companies made a loss last year. So this is not an industry where there's a lot of money being made left, right and centre. We need this investment. Ofwat will scrutinise all the assumptions that are being made by each company, and we're very hopeful that they will give us the green light, because what's most important of all is that we get this infrastructure. We can no longer kick the can down the road. With a growing population and climate change, it's absolutely vital that we make this infrastructure additions now.
OK, David, we have to leave it there. Appreciate you joining me this morning. It's obviously a busy day there. Thank you.
Very much.
Well, that's it from me for now. I'll be back at 4:30 this afternoon with our afternoon edition, when we'll have more details on what the Chancellor had to say in his speech. And there's also a very interesting company that's IPOing today. You can hear from the CEO there as well. That's all coming up at 4:30 this afternoon. See you then. Cheerio.